Welcome to the Family Answer Man. This is David Orgis, and I am here with Dr. Mark Crosby. This time is designed to answer questions commonly asked in the counseling and church settings that we are in. Our goal is to answer general questions from a biblical worldview through the lens of our collective years of experience and education to help you, our listener, have a stronger, healthier, and happier family. I want to take a second to say thank you to some incredible people at Winter's Air and Days Meat Market for making this possible. So for all your air conditioning needs, get in contact with Winter's Air, or for all your meat processing, catering, and local lunch needs, Days Meat Market is the place for you. Now, to start out this morning, I want to let you know that this is not a therapy session, nor is this advice specifically to your situation. Mental health is a very serious issue, and family dynamics are or can be very complicated and dynamic. So, for more in-depth answers to your questions, we encourage you to seek professional counseling for your specific circumstances. We hope this episode of Family Answer Man will encourage you and inspire you to make changes that will lead to a stronger, healthier, and happier family. So I want to first introduce myself. My name is David Orgis, and I have a master's in professional counseling. I've been in ministry for 18 years, and I was ordained in the Southern Baptist Church. I am married and will be married for 11 years this November, and I've got 4 incredible kids, 8, 7, 5, and 18 months old, so they keep me busy with my hands full. I am here with Dr. Mark Crosby, and he is highly acclaimed and accredited and educated, and I want to let you know a little bit about him today because he is our expert. So Dr. Mark is he is a doctor. He has his PhD in family psychology, a master's in clinical counseling, a master's education in pastoral counseling and theology. He has a master in law with a focus in mediation. He is a licensed professional counselor, a licensed professional counselor supervisor, and a licensed marriage and family therapist. He's also a qualified family divorce mediator. He's a qualified parenting coordinator, qualified child and family forensics. He's certified in trauma treatment, certified in integrative medicine. He's an expert witness in the family court of the 21st jurisdiction state of Louisiana. He was ordained in the Southern Baptist Church and consecrated in the United Methodist Church. And I'm going to let Dr. Mark, you take over and tell us how long you've been in ministry and tell us a little bit about your family and yourself.
Yeah, I've been married almost 40 years. I've got 3 children. I've got 8 grandchildren. And counseling's been something I've been doing for the last 30 years. It began kind of interestingly when we were living in Buras, Louisiana. And if anybody knows where Buras is, it is at the big toe of Louisiana towards the mouth of the river. And the reality was we were down there, and it's a very isolated area. As a matter of fact, the Coast Guard calls it semi-isolated. And so therefore, there's hardly any professionals in that area. And so we were there serving, and we we're getting all these questions and all these situations that require, professional counseling and therapy. And so I went back to school, began to educate and structure, my understanding of psychology and counseling, and just continued on, and worked for Southern Baptist Hospital during that time as a part of their counseling and pastoral counseling and psychiatry department, and just really grew and had a great time learning and sharing, and just had some great mentors, and we just continued on and have been doing this for the last 30 years.
So you really kind of got your start in Buras and started exploring psychology and family counseling. How's that translated to your current day, and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Right. So I was at Baptist Hospital for 3 years, learning, sharing, being mentored under some great supervisors, Dr. Madden, who has passed away, but one of the greats, Dr. Doug Ezel, also great supervisor. And so we transitioned to where now we have a private practice here in the Baton Rouge area. We also supervise a faith-based counseling program at Live Oak Methodist Church in Watson. And so between those 2 practices, we try to help as many people as we possibly can, but it's been a great journey. We've seen a lot of amazing things happen. One of the joys of doing therapy and counseling is to see someone who has struggles, who has questions, who has concerns, and who feels hopeless, receive the instruction, the skills, just the different understanding of how dynamics of how marriage works, and begin to apply them. And when they do, and things begin to improve, to see them improve, to see their marriage get stronger and better, to see them happier, makes all the difference in the world. And it's the joy of what we do. So
Now, the Family Answer Man is designed to take questions that that you've gotten a lot and that we've heard a lot of different times,
Correct.
and help answer those questions from a general perspective. We've mentioned that this isn't therapy, and so if people do want to seek therapy, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, they could call us at 225-936-2607. If they would like to have more of a faith-based approach, they could call 225-664-4801. That's Live Oak Church in Watson, and we have some great people here that will be helpful to them. It is, for the most part, very affordable, and we would like to encourage people just to try us out and see what we can do for them.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, let's jump in. We've got some great questions and some that I think are going to relate to people really well. So the first question is, my wife and I dated for 2 years. After we were married, it seemed as if everything had changed. We were less affectionate. We argue more. We say insulting things to each other. Is this normal?
It's common, because the reality is a lot of folks see marriage sometimes as advanced dating, and it's not. Marriage is a brand new arena of life. And the reason what makes it a different arena is because, again, you're now, for the first time in your life, attached and committed to someone, perhaps, that is not only spiritual in nature, but also legal in nature. I mean, marriage is a legal binding contract and spiritual covenant. And so because of that, everything changes. And if you're not sure of how to make that transition, if you think of marriage as nothing more than advanced dating, then you will approach it in a way that it was never designed to be approached, meaning you'll still think of yourself as the center of everything. Well, now that you're married, life's not about you anymore. Two illustrations I love to give is that there's a difference between riding a bicycle and riding a motorcycle. If you try to ride a motorcycle the way you ride a bicycle, and don't ask me how I know this, but if you try to ride a motorcycle the way you ride a bicycle, you're going to have a problem. Even though they look similar, two wheels, the whole bit, but it's different. And so, or another illustration I love to use is that if you volunteer for a company or organization, a nonprofit, that's one thing. But once you start working for them as an employee, it's a completely different setting and situation. And dynamic, and so it is with marriage. Dating is one thing, but marriage is a brand new ball game. The rules have changed, the needs have changed, and marriage puts you in a whole different realm. And so one of the things that I tell folks all the time is that we get married because there are certain needs that we have. And needs that only can be fulfilled in marriage. And so, for example, I ask sometimes the husband, do you understand the needs of your wife? And he'll look at me with this deer in the headlight look. Or sometimes I'll ask that to the wife, and she'll have the same, what do you talk about? I feed him, I do his laundry. And I'm saying, yeah, I know that, but a maid can do that. I don't mean that condescendingly, but do you understand the need of the wife? Do you understand the need of the husband? And so we begin to unpack that a little bit. And so one of the first things I share is that, the needs are very important. And so the needs, and I shared this with the husband, of the wife are, number one, she needs to feel valued. I think one of the first things that every wife wants to know is that she is the most important person, that she is the priority of his world. And what begins to happen is that if the husband does not understand that, then his hunting camp or his golf game or his LSU tickets will be the priority of his life, or his job. And I'm not saying that in a way that, again, is condescending, but if we're not careful, we don't make that transition and make sure that our wife understands that she is our priority and that we value her above all else, then things begin to break down. You see, marriage, I will argue, was intended to succeed. And and the only way it can succeed is if the husband says to his wife, you are my priority and I value you. Number two, she needs meaningful romance. It's amazing how men are really good. We're good at hunting, right? In other words, we get up early in the morning and we put on the camouflage and we, get our gun and we go out in the duck blind. And when the hunt's over, we're done. Well, that's kind of how a lot of women feel when they were being, courted or dated, if you will, by their husband. Now that the hunt's over, now that I've got you, I don't have to look as good or smell as good or act as good. And the reality is she still wants meaningful romance. A third thing that women want and need is meaningful communication. They want to hear from the husband. They want to talk. They want to share. They want to have a sense of, what's going on in your life, in your world. But if the husband doesn't give her that, if he doesn't and spend time listening and sharing, then she feels a disconnect. And then fourthly, I share with husbands that your wife needs to feel that you want to just hold her and hug her without it leading into anything. In other words, she just wants to be held, to know that she feels loved, she feels connected, she feels an attachment to her husband. Now, whenever I say this, and I say this at weddings all the time, so many of our listeners may have heard this before, but the reality is that when I say this, men go, what about my needs? Well, ladies, your husband has needs as well, and you need to understand what those needs are and then begin to meet them. And the first one I will argue is the need for adoration. Men love to be praised. This is something I say all the time. That's why there are cheerleaders on the sidelines. Men love it when the woman in their life adore them and praise them. Number two, most men's love language, and this is something we'll be talking about later on, but most men's love language, I will argue, is affection. They want that affection. They want to be, again, touched by their wife. They want that sense of, I know that she desires who I am. And so that affection is important. Not only that, but attention. Most men want to be noticed. I mean, this is something that a lot of men don't talk about, but, they dress, they, take care of their car. They do all these things because they want to be noticed as well. And last of all, most men want appreciation. So when a wife says to her husband, hey, look, I appreciate what you do. I appreciate who you are. I appreciate the things that we have together. That speaks, that sense of accomplishment and approval into the life of the husband. And so here's the point, bottom line. When we're meeting the need of each other and filling that emotional love tank, life is good because our emotional love tank is being filled. But when we don't, and our emotional tank becomes empty, then a very powerful biblical principle kicks in. And here's the principle. The Bible says that if a person is full, nothing can tempt them. But if a person is empty, even garbage looks good. You can say that physically, you can say that emotionally. Go to your favorite seafood restaurant. Go to Dave's Meat House, right? The meat market, and get their biggest steak and eat their biggest steak, and you are full. And if they say, look, here's a free dessert, what are you going to say? Hey, I'm full.
Their pecan pies are awesome.
They are awesome. They're amazing. However, go 3 or 4 days without eating, what's in the dumpster behind Dave's Meat Market starts looking good to you. And there lies the principle. When a person is full, nothing can tempt them. But when a person is empty, even garbage looks good. So these are just some things that I think that we need to understand, especially in those first few years of marriage, to understand the rules have changed. I need to be more diligent, more focused on meeting my spouse's need, because once I get married, life is no longer about me.
So if like this question said, it seems like the tank is a little bit empty, maybe not all the way, maybe a little bit, maybe it is. It's all the way empty and it's bone dry. You listed some needs for the wives and needs for the husbands. What's the best first step to starting to refill that tank?
Yeah, I think the first step is always, diagnosis. Recognize we have a problem. Now, I tell folks all the time that whenever a problem occurs in your life or my life, your marriage, my marriage, whatever, we're going to land in one of two camps. And the first camp we want to land in, or the easiest camp to land in, I should say, is what I call the drama camp. And the drama camp is we got a problem and we have a lot of energy and we're saying a lot of things, but nothing's getting solved. And again, the illustration that I use, and listeners just know I'm going to give you a lot of silly illustrations to make the point. But the illustration that I love to use is that if your car gets stuck in mud, you can hit the accelerator as all you want. You can yell and scream as to who got it stuck. You can, try to hit that accelerator and rev that engine up. And you know what? Your tires spin and you get deeper in the mud and you're going nowhere. That's drama. But if you get a couple of good old boys and some friends and some chains and whatever and some, 4x4s or whatever, and you hook that chain up to the car and pull it out of the mud, you've now solved the problem. So the question you have to ask yourself is this: which am I? Am I going to go into the drama camp and spin my wheels and go nowhere, or am I going to the problem-solving camp? And so the problem-solving camp would say, look, we've got a problem. We understand what's going on. This is our diagnosis, and here's what we're going to do to solve it. We're going to start meeting each other's needs. I'm going to be more attentive to you. I'm going to give you the words that you need of affirmation. I'm going to listen more intently. I'm going to carve out more time to give you and make you my priority. I'm going to bring you with me when I go here or there instead of leaving you at home and let me hang. You're going to be my priority. You're going to be my very best friend, and you're the one who I share life with. And once you start meeting those needs, that emotional love tank begins to fill up, and life feels a whole lot better.
I think that's a great answer to that question. And hopefully we'll give a lot of hope to people that maybe this isn't normal. It's not the way that it's supposed to be. You said something that I love. You said that marriage was intended to succeed.
Yes.
But that this is something that's common.
Right.
And I think it leads to a great next question that we have this morning. And so question number 2 that I think fits perfectly is I've always heard that communication is the key to a happy marriage. So looking at what are the needs of each other and communicating with each other. My husband and I don't communicate, and I feel really unhappy in my marriage of almost 10 years. He watches sports and plays video games. I stay on social media. I like to read until I get tired. What can we do?
Yeah, communication, and we hear this all the time, professionally, personally. Communication is important, no doubt about it. But the question that I often ask is, so what's blocking the communication? I mean, most of us know how to communicate. We talk, we share, we text. So communication is something that we know how to do, but what is blocking the communication between a husband and wife? Why is it we're not talking? Why is it that we're not really hearing the other one? And I'll argue this. What blocks our communication in many cases is what I call these unresolved issues. Again, there's a verse in the Bible that says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. And what that would mean, I will argue, is that if you allow problems to go unsolved, in other words, a couple gets into an argument, they have a disagreement, and they kind of go their separate way, but they never solve that problem, or they pretend like it never happened, or we're just going to, move on. That problem is still there. And what begins to happen is over time, that problem that's unsolved begins to create what I call an emotional clot. In other words, it's kind of like a blood clot. It stops the flow of connection, stops the flow of communication. And so what happens is that if that problem goes unsolved and there's no resolution and we continue to go down this path and another problem and then another problem and then another problem and none of them get solved, what happens is that men, because they are emotionally wounded, or women, because they're emotionally wounded, begin to punish the other person by stonewalling. Dr. John Gottman talks about the 4 horsemen of marital apocalypse. And we'll talk about those more, in our program. But they are, when you're critical, when you bring contempt or disrespect, when you're defensive, and when you stonewall. And stonewall is basically defined as talk to the hand. I'm not going to respond to you. I'm going to pretend like you're not there. I'm going to disconnect from you emotionally. I'm going to disconnect from you verbally. And the reality is marriage is designed for us to feel a connection, to feel an attachment. And so stonewalling tears that down. And so what begins to happen is that these emotional clots start to form and we stop talking. We stop listening. And then eventually this evolves into we stop caring. So what's the solution? The solution, I will argue, is relatively simple. And that is, this is going to sound very cliche to some of our listeners, but it's very basic. But sometimes the basic things are the best things: forgiveness and grace. When you realize what you've said or done, when you own what you've done, when you quit defending what you've done, and you say to your spouse, like, I was wrong, I know I shouldn't have said that, I know I shouldn't have done that, please forgive me. And the spouse forgives that debt. They forgive that situation. They forgive that action. Forgiveness and grace is the oil to your marriage. It's like anything else. Every mechanic, and even if you don't have to be a mechanic to know this, but if you drain the oil out of your car, with 100% certainty, I will guarantee what will happen to your car's engine if there's no oil in it. 100% guarantee. I will guarantee what will happen to your car's engine if it has no oil. Well, the same is true with marriage. Without forgiveness and grace, that is the oil to our marriage, then things begin to break down. Things get so hot, they begin to just freeze up. And now things are no longer what you're hoping and wanting them to be in your marriage. And so forgiveness and grace, apologizing, owning your part, that is the oil to your marriage.
So I just want to jump in real quick right here, because that sounds logical, and I believe what you're saying. But I think for a lot of people, you're going to have this maybe pushback or a question to say, Mark, you're telling me that I need to say, hey, I'm sorry, I messed up, I need forgiveness. One, I'm worried that they're not going to forgive me, and two, is it really worth the risk?
That's part of being married. And what I mean by that is this. And again, it's not about you. Once you get married, that is the number one principle. Life is no longer about you. And it's about doing the right thing. It's about doing the responsible thing. And the right thing is to own your part, to seek forgiveness. You see that is a concept, that is a principle, both in the Bible and even outside the Bible, even in cultures where the Bible may not be relevant or read. Forgiveness is powerful, because when you don't forgive, the alternative is breakdown. The alternative is revenge. Revenge doesn't work in marriage. I tell couples all the time, when you are married, punishment should never be a reality. You do not punish your spouse. You can punish your children. We punish criminals. We were never called to punish our spouse. We're called to give our spouse the forgiveness and the grace that they need. Biblically speaking, the Bible says, we're to love our wife the way Christ loves the church. What does Jesus do for the church? He forgives us with lots and lots of grace. And if you're not quite sure what grace is, let me just kind of give this little theological principle and go something like this. If someone were to, say, hurt your child, revenge would be, I'm going to hurt that person who hurt my child. That's revenge. Right. Justification would be, I'm going to call the cops to have this person arrested and perhaps thrown in jail. Grace is, I'm going to adopt that person as my very own and take care of them. That is why grace is called amazing. The Bible says that when we were enemies of God, that's when his forgiveness and grace came.
That's deep.
Yeah. So, but back to the marriage question. You have to, forgiveness is that oil, and you have to just allow yourself to be vulnerable. You have to allow yourself to be willing. You have to allow yourself to simply say, you know what, I'm going to humble myself and I'm going to seek that forgiveness. The Bible says that God's opposed to the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. So when you humble yourself, it creates that connection that is often lost when there is a fight, an argument, a disagreement.
You also talked about the emotional clotting. If there's been emotional clotting and there's that disconnect that they referenced in the marriage, seems like they haven't talked 10 years, things have grown cold, stale. How do you get that flowing again?
Yeah, again, you cannot resolve or treat what you don't diagnose. And sometimes you have to take some time, and this is where therapy comes in many times, and you have to take some time and open that door and say, look, I know what I said 5 years ago. I know what I said 10 years ago. Look, I've got couples who come to me who are still struggling over what was said or done on their honeymoon, or what wasn't said or done on their honeymoon. 25 years later, they're coming to me saying, we're still struggling with that time in our married life. And so you have to unpack some of this stuff, and you have to be willing to recognize your part, and you have to be willing to say, you know what, I was wrong and I need your forgiveness. And when that begins to happen, I would like to believe in most cases, there is a sense of forgiveness, and there is a sense of love, and there is a sense of grace that begins to reconnect the attachment. Attachment in family life is a key word. We were designed, we were created, we were wired, ever how you want to put it, to feel attached. The Bible says it is not good to be alone. We were not wired to be alone, which is one reason why even prisoners will tell you the worst thing that can be done to them is solitary confinement, because we are called to be connected. And so when you're forgiving, and when you're giving grace, and when you're loving, and when you're letting things go, and when you're owning your part, that creates that connection and that attachment.
So don't let the sun go down on your anger is more than just, hey, we can't go to bed with any kind of unresolved problems, but it's a lot deeper than that, it sounds like.
Well, it begins there. I'll argue that. It begins there. I've got friends, I've got family, who've said to me, look, whenever we have a problem, we will continue to work on it until we resolve it. It may be at 3:00 in the morning. So literally they may, do it that way. But, the next day or the next morning or whenever, you recognize we just cannot sweep this under the rug. This has got to be dealt with. And a lot of couples, a lot of people, they're just, their way of handling problems is, let's just pretend like it never happened. Let's just pretend. And you can only pretend for so long because it did happen. And those wounds are real. And that hurt is causing a disconnect between you and the one you love.
So it's somebody's going to probably hear that and say, oh, so we're supposed to go and dig up the past.
Well, in some cases you are, because if the past has never been resolved, now again, don't misunderstand me, we don't stay in the past, okay? But there are moments and there are times when you have to go back and make some things right. You have to go back and say, you know what, we never dealt with that. We never resolved that. And I just want you to know, I understand that. And maybe you couldn't at that time. Maybe because of a lack of maturity or a lack of insight, maybe you could not deal with it at that time. But now that you're a little bit older, a little bit wiser, a little more mature, or now you have the skill set because of therapy, because of books you've read, because of a sermon you heard or whatever, now you have the skill set to maybe address it now when you could not address it then with any sense of maturity or skill set.
So not digging up the past to just go and wallow in the mud, but more of the archaeologist that's going back to figure out.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, archaeologists, we may have read that the walls of Jericho came tumbling down, and we read about it and we learned about it in school or Sunday school or whatever. But when an archaeologist actually says, here are the walls, we've discovered them, and you see them and you touch them and you see pictures of them or whatever, you realize, hey, this is not just a story. This actually happened. So it is with marriage. Sometimes you have to do the archaeological dig, if you will, to realize, this actually happened, this actually hurt, and I need to spend a moment, not wallow in it, as you said, but I need to spend a moment saying, you know what, I was wrong there, and I need you to forgive me. And that wound now begins to start healing. There are so many people, so many couples that I work with and see all the time who live their life with all of these, for lack of a better word, open wounds, and they're just wanting some healing. And sometimes this is one way of doing it.
Yeah, it's amazing. Talk about those open wounds and those healing things that are unresolved, things that are under the surface. And, we can all relate to that in medicine, but it seems like there's a disconnect or a hard hurdle to get over when it comes to the emotional healing that we need.
Right.
But it makes so much sense.
Well, like I said before, what's true, and I guess we'll close with this, what's true for the soul is true for the body. What's true for the body is true for the soul. Like I said a moment ago, when you are physically full because you had a great meal, you don't want dessert. You're just full. But when you're empty, even garbage looks good. And so it is in so many other areas of life. What's true for the body is true for the soul.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mark. This has been fantastic, and we hope that you, as our listeners, have been blessed by this. Just a reminder, this is not a therapy session. This is not specific advice to your situation. Hopefully, these principles that Dr. Mark has talked about today will be helpful, that they will be a helpful guide, that there will be things that inspire you to make changes, maybe to take that big step that you need to go back and address things that are in your past that are unresolved, or to deal with and help heal some of those emotional wounds that are there, and clear out some of the emotional clots that are impeding the communication that you have with your significant other, with your husband, with your wife. Also, just want to remind you that if you do want more in-depth therapy, more in-depth answers, you can always go and get in touch with Dr. Mark and seek out some professional, in-depth one-on-one or couples therapy that'll help you out a lot. We also want to let you know that you can send in your questions to the show at the Family Answer Man at loumc.org or soundradioinfo@milldale.org. Again, that's Family Answer Man at loumc.org or soundradioinfo@milldale.org. And we would love to hear from you to gather those questions. We're going to be going through questions that we commonly receive just in counseling in the church, but also we want to hear questions that maybe we could specifically answer or speak more directly to that you have that we can send in. And again, we are so thankful for Winter's Air and for Days Meat Market for making this possible, providing this time that we have to be with you and to give you these answers from Dr. Mark, the Family Answer Man. Thank you so much, and we hope that you'll join us again.